Jeg tror det er best å rope ett.
En krigsforbryter! Clinton en krigsforbryter! Clinton en krigsforbryter! Clinton en krigsforbryter! Imperialisme ikke feminisme! 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 Imperialisme ikke feminisme!
Der kom Superwoman nå. Hun blir hese før toget der, ja.
Lang dag.
Men hvem er Superwoman?
Det er ikke Superwoman, det er katten.
Gi meg en N!
Ja.
Gi meg en A! Gi meg en T! Gi meg en O! Hva blir det? Kvinnemord! Hva blir det? Kvinnemord! Hørte ikke? Kvinnemord! Det bra.
Kan vi...
Nå er vi på BI i Nydalen. Her det foregår en stor likestillingskonferanse i dag, og hovedtaleren kommer nå klokka 3, og det er altså tidligere utenriksminister Hillary Clinton fra USA. Det er det ikke alle som er fornøyd med å tale Ellinghag fra Rødt. Hvorfor står dere her og demonstrerer?
Vi som de fleste av oss er også studenter, vi står her og sier fra at det er ikke greit at BI inviterer en krigersk representant for liksom amerikanske imperialisme som Hillary Clinton. Og i hvert fall ikke på 8. mars, fordi det er jo sånn at det er kvinner og barn som bærer på en måte kostnadene av disse amerikanske krigene. For eksempel Libya, som jo hun var en av hovedarkitektene bak. Der er det kvinner og barn som lider og som dør. Det er store sivile tap. Sånn at vi mener at det er en helt bizarr ting å invitere henne hit for å prate i på en måte likestillingens navn. Det er ikke snakk om likestilling i det hele tatt. Minoritetskvinner verden over lider nettopp under henne og hennes kollegers på en måte opptog rundt om i verden.
Vi hadde et innlegg på trykk for noen dager siden fra Seher Aydar, også i Rødt, som også problematiserte det at Hadia Tajik takket ja til å delta på konferansen her i dag. Hva tenker du om det?
Ja, nei, det mener jeg er riktig. Hadde man stått i solidaritet med kvinner verden over, så hadde man jo nettopp takket nei i solidaritet med de kvinnene, og ikke latt seg på en måte forføre av at Clinton er her og er et stort navn og det er kjendiseri rundt henne. Det er egentlig ganske uinteressant hvis man først mener at man skal stå i solidaritet med de kvinnene som lider mest.
Nå har vi ingen representanter fra BI med oss her ute akkurat nå, men jeg antar at de ville sagt at det er jo ikke først og fremst i rollen som krigshisser de har invitert Hillary Clinton, men hun var altså den første kvinnelige presidentkandidaten i USA. Hun hadde på valgnatta et stort glasstak over scenen som ikke ble knust, men man kan vel også argumentere for at hun har hatt betydning for kvinners posisjon i USA nettopp i egenskap av å ha trådt foran som politiker. Er du enig i det?
Ja, altså jeg skal ikke legge skjul på at det er sikkert ting hun har, eller det er ting hun har sagt og gjort som har vært en fordel for andre kvinner, men det veier på en måte ikke opp da, med de livene som har gått tapt, og som fortsetter å gå tapt i de landene som er rasert. Og jeg synes det er ganske... Altså, man trenger ikke å være krigshisser for å på en måte snakke kvinners sak i USA. Bare se på Alexandra Cortez, på en måte. Der har du en helt annen form for kvinnepolitikk som faktisk er kvinnepolitikk. Det er jo ikke sånn at Hillary Clinton har ført en veldig feministisk politikk heller, selv om hun er kvinne. Det er ikke sånn at vi bare skal stå ukritisk og heie hverandre frem som kvinner. Det er ikke feminisme.
Dere har med dere en parole her i dag. Hva er det som står på den?
Det står altså 'imperialisme er ikke feminisme', Clinton go home, står det.
Skal dere ha med den videre i 18. mars-toget senere i dag?
Ja, det er klart vi skal det. Det er blant mange paroler der.
Da skal vi la dere fortsette med slagordene. Lykke til videre.
Takk skal du ha.
Imperialisme er ikke feminisme. Imperialisme er ikke feminisme. Imperialisme er ikke feminisme.
Alle er altså ikke spente på hva Hillary Clinton kommer til å si her inne i forelesningssalen på BI nå om en 20 minutters tid. Men det har vært lange køer fram til de åpne dørene inn til auditoriet nå for få minutter siden. Og det har altså vært en rekke talere på programmet tidligere her i dag, blant annet skipsstedsjef og tidligere NHO-direktør Kristin Skogenlund, Hadia Tajik, nestleder i Arbeiderpartiet, har holdt tale. Jeg så Jonas Gahr Støre her på plass også. Det har vært en rekke BI-professorer og en direktør fra Evry, men det store navnet her i dag er altså tidligere utenriksminister og tidligere presidentkandidat for det demokratiske partiet i USA, Hillary Clinton. Det var jo en stor nyhet da det ble kjent at hun skulle komme hit til BI i Nydalen i anledning deres likestillingskonferanse på kvinnedagen 8. mars. BI har forsøkt å få Clinton til Norge i lang tid, og det er ikke kjent hva de har måttet betale for å få henne hit, men de har ytret at det har blant annet vært diskusjon om hun var villig til å fly rutefly hit til Norge, som hun nå altså har gjort her i dag. Hun er jo selvfølgelig omfattet av et omfattende sikkerhetsopplegg. Det er svært mye politi til stede utenfor bygningen her, også før Clinton har ankommet. Så det er vært ganske strengt også rundt akkreditering og pressens vilkår, for blant annet ikke lov til å ha med datamaskiner inn i auditoriumet der hun skal tale. Det er selvfølgelig likevel et klart presseoppbud til stede her, og vi kommer til å sende Clintons foredrag direkte på dagbladet.no. Det begynner altså nå klokka 3. Selve foredraget har ikke fått noen offisiell tittel på programmet. Tema for konferansen er økonomi og likestilling, hvor for eksempel Hadia Tajik holdt foredrag om hvorfor kvinner er mer lønnsomt enn oljen for Norge. Det er jo den høye yrkesdeltagelsen blant norske kvinner som er mye av grunnen til at går såpass bra økonomisk for Norge, og det har jo vært et av de viktige elementene i likestillingsdebatten i Norge og internasjonalt i lang tid. Høy yrkesdeltagelse gir mer skattekroner og et bedre velferdssamfunn som følge av det. Så det har altså vært tematisert her i dag. Nå ser vi at det har trukket publikum inn i salen. Dette er jo et arrangement som ikke er åpent for hvem som helst. Det er altså BIs fulltidsstudenter som dette arrangementet er laget for. Det har ikke vært mulig for utenforstående å kjøpe billetter for å høre Clinton og de andre foredragsholderne her i dag. Men de har et internasjonalt program her på høyskolen, hvor de har også hatt en rekke internasjonale deltakere gjennom denne uka, og hatt da likestilling på programmet over flere dager. Men krones altså med det som i dag kalles en Gender Equality Conference, som rett og slett bare betyr likestillingskonferanse, og en rekke prominente foredragsholdere også før Hillary Clinton nå inntar scenen ganske snart.
part of the necessary change. You can do the change. We can do the change together. So once again, a warm welcome to Oslo and have a very interesting seminar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marianne Borgen and Inge Jan Henje-Sand. Now we are ready to start the conference, and we're going to start out with a bang because we're going to start with a very decisive statement. It is that women are more profitable than oil. And why is that? Starting with a decisive statement and applause. That's a very good start. This is a quote from Hadia Tajik, the deputy leader of the Norwegian Labour Party. So it also answers the eternal question in Norway: what are we gonna live of after the oil dries out? We're gonna keep producing women workers. Please, Hadia Tajik.
Okay, guys, I'm going to make a very simple claim, and the claim has been introduced, that women are more profitable than oil. And I do mean this in the very literal sense of the word profitable. I mean it in dollars and euros, or kroner and øre, as we would say in Norwegian. And I'm not being metaphorical at all. So basically, if you were to be a rich and crazy dictator, your main asset would be the women of your society. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not encouraging you to become crazy and rich dictators. I'm just saying that if you were that, the best asset would be the women, investing in them. Investing in women creates not only individual success stories, it creates riches and wealth and success for the society as a whole. And in order to understand that claim, you will have to join me going back in time to the 70s, to a teeny tiny village on the west coast of Norway. It's called Bjørheimsbygd. It's where I'm from, as you probably gathered. I was born and raised in Bjørheimsbygd by Pakistani parents from a working class background. I'm a Muslim, and I'd claim that you don't very often hear that kind of story, that a young woman in her 30s, having that kind of background, ends up becoming one of the youngest ministers in the government of that country. Now, I've thought about this many times. I could have lived the same life, worked just as hard, done all my homework, getting up in the early mornings, getting to bed in the late evenings, doing my very best, but not reaching the same kinds of heights that have been possible for me in Norway. If all the other things were the same: minority background, gender, working class background. And I do believe that is true for a lot of the female leading figures in Norway, be it in public or private sector, or be it in politics. You've all heard the old African proverb, you need a village to raise a child, right? You've heard it? Yeah. But actually, you need a whole society in order to create individual success. Now, if you'd ask the average Norwegian, why is it that Norway is one of the richest of the rich countries of the world? Most Norwegians, and please do the exercise, just go out on the street afterwards and ask an average Norwegian, how did that become a fact? Most Norwegians would say that the thing is, in the late 60s, early 70s, we found oil on the continental shelf of Norway, and we managed those assets quite well, creating the Norwegian state pension fund or oil fund, and basically that is how we got rich. However, that's not entirely true. The main reason why Norway is such a wealthy country are the women in our society. Now, there are no genetic predispositions that make Norwegian women more profitable than other women, obviously, so it has to be something else. It has to do with the 3 W's: work, welfare, and a well-organized labor market, which leads us to the 4th W, the profitable women. I'll start with a well-organized labor market. That's been of great support for my family as well. I mean, my parents coming from Pakistan to Norway in the 1970s, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, not having any friends here, they were quite vulnerable to exploitation and mistreatment in the labor market. And again, I've thought about this many times. What if they hadn't come to Norway? What if they'd gone to a Middle Eastern country as labor migrants? What would have happened? We know that in some Middle Eastern countries, if you come there as a labor migrant, they take your passport from you. You've got nowhere to run. You risk not getting a proper wage. Most likely, you will not get a proper wage. And the contract that you end up signing on will seem like a slave contract. Now, this didn't happen to my family. In Norway, we have strong labor unions. And what the labor unions do is that they make sure that the laborers are not being exploited. And a very important part of that is also making sure that that is something they find equally important, regardless of what kind of background you have, what kind of country you come from. Because if the labor unions decide that it doesn't really matter, I mean, they're immigrants, they're somebody else's problem, not our problem. If they end up thinking that, they will create a parallel black market in Norway, which in turn will decrease the wages and the working conditions of Norwegians in general. So it's a no-go. That leads us to the 2nd W, welfare. The way we tell our stories of success, we have a tendency to glorify pain. We love the story of the underdog, getting back at society, getting back at everybody who didn't believe in him, hanging on to his dream by his fingernails and then climbing to the top. But the thing is, safety is really important to people. And sometimes some people make it sound like having a safety net will pacify you, that it will make you lazy or unproductive or unwilling to take a risk. But a lot of experience and a lot of research shows us the exact opposite. The UN has several times said that Norway is one of the best countries to live in. The World Bank Group has an annual publication called Ease of Doing Business, and it ranks Norway quite highly. Save the Children has said that Norway is one of the best countries for mothers. There are no rankings for best country for fathers. I don't know why that is. But if there was such a ranking, I'm quite sure we would do well in that ranking as well. This is, of course, no coincidence. There is an obvious connection between being a good society to live in for men and women and being a good society to do business in, to prosper in, to be creative in, to take risks in. And this just underlines the value of welfare, of things like childcare facilities that you can afford, parental leave. We know that when women don't work, there are different reasons for that. They could be very individual. They could be social. They could be cultural. They could be religious. But it could also be about the basic economics of the family. If the father is the one with the highest wages, it will cost the family too much if he's the one staying at home. Unless you have proper maternity and paternity leave and kindergarten facilities that you can afford. Unless you have that, it's not going to be possible for most mothers to go to work. In Norway, as the Honourable Mayor mentioned, today we have 59 weeks of parental leave for each child. And more than seeing this as an expense for society, we need to see it as an investment for the future and future wealth. Because obviously, a good family life, a stable family life, it allows for more people, especially women, to take part in the workforce. That leads us to the third W, work. Now, this is the really easy one. I mean, if half of your population is not going to work, then you're losing out on half of the money you could have made. You're losing out on half of the talent that you have in your country. And in Norway, we've done the maths on this. If Norwegian women were working as little as the OECD average, Norway would be losing out on values equaling the oil fund. That's 8,000 billion Norwegian kroner. That's 1,000 billion US dollars. So women are more profitable than oil. And how is that for a crazy dictator strategy? Getting your women liberated, getting them out there working, using their talents, making their way in life. The only thing is, if you do choose this strategy as a crazy dictator, investing in work, welfare, and well-organized labor markets, you risk not being a crazy dictator for very long. Even a Muslim woman in her 30s, from a village, with Pakistani parents and a working-class background, might end up a politician on your level. Thank you.
Thank you, Hadia Tajik. In Norway, gender equality is also equal on both sides of politics. Let's not forget that the 4 party leaders in the current government are all women, and that the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the Finance Minister are women. In fact, the Minister of Trade and Industry was, the last one, was a woman. So it's about time we let a man have a chance, huh? So here to talk about why gender equality is good for business is Mr. Torbjørn Røe Isaksen.
Thank you. A couple of years ago, I was walking in the Vigelands Park in Oslo. I was together with 2 friends. It was the middle of the day. We all had our paternal leave, and we were walking with our strollers, or with our kids' strollers. And all of a sudden, a group of about 40 or 50, I think, what I found was Chinese tourists, stopped us. And for a moment, I was I was a bit conceited, actually, because I thought I have been interviewed in Chinese media. That's true, so they might recognize me. As a minister, perhaps, I don't know. Maybe they've seen some brochure about Norway. But of course, it was the utter exoticness of 3 men walking in the middle of the day with their strollers in Norway. They didn't even know that one of them was a minister. And actually, the 2 others was my vice minister, and the 3rd one had just become a member of the Nobel Committee. They didn't care. And I'm sure there's a political message in here somewhere, but I just wanted to say this because if there are any Chinese students here, you might recognize me from tourist photos. 2 days ago, I was opening the SHE conference, a big conference in Oslo. It's an important conference that brings together business professionals from across sectors and borders, and the goal is to increase diversity and, moreover, to close the gender gap in business. There's a lot of talk these days, and there has been for several years, about gender equality. And that's a very good thing, because we need to talk about it as well. But of course, talking isn't enough. And that's the point of my speech today, because we also need action. And when I say phrases like, we need action, I find myself thinking, we need action. That sounds a lot like a slogan. And in a way, it is a slogan. And my second point today is that we tend to have too many slogans and not enough systematic work when it comes to gender equality. We need more knowledge about how to do it. We need more knowledge and more systematic approach to the way we do it. We need an evidence-based approach. We need to regularly monitor and measure progress. We need to update our knowledge on a regular basis so we can see what's going on. We need to monitor results in individual companies. I guess most of you are business students. If you go into a company that wants to conquer a new market, and you have a CEO looking at that market saying, I feel like we should conquer that market, just leaving it at that, would that be a good CEO? Obviously not. It would be a horrible strategy. What would you do? What would be the business way of approaching this? First, you would have a systematic approach. You would measure results. You would have a regular standard for gathering facts to monitor how the progress is being made. So why shouldn't we use the same business standard for achieving new markets, for example, when it comes to getting more women into private business? How come we let CEOs get away with just saying, I feel like this is a big priority, but without working systematically, without taking a systematic approach to how you can actually get more women at the top of business, either as board members, board leaders, presidents, or in the management? I don't want to be pessimistic, because there's a lot to be optimistic about. There's a lot to celebrate. However, gender equality and the bigger issue of diversity has to be and tends to be a big issue in all countries, including Norway. And there's a reason for it. Even in Norway, being one of the most gender equal countries in the world, we see it in our education system, we see it in our labor market, and not least, we see it in our private businesses. It's not about a lack of understanding, because everybody knows this is a problem. It's about deep cultural and business culture related issues. Let me just give you one example of why, even though we can be optimistic and things are moving ahead, there are still some reasons to be not pessimistic, but to be more impatient than we are. Many of you know this, but Norway was one of the first countries to introduce a quota for women on company boards. It was actually introduced under a conservative government, so there's a bit of a difference between conservatives in different countries, of course. The rule means that, in accordance with Norwegian law, the boards of public limited companies must consist of at least 40% of either gender. And of course, in business, that means women in practice. So since the time of introduction, the number of women has increased on these company boards. However, if you look more closely, you'll see that the number of women on company boards has increased only in the companies where it's mandated by law. 12 years after the introduction of the boardroom quota, it's had no significant effect on women in boards in other areas or women in management in general. So if you look at the top of the power hierarchy in Norwegian business life, there is still a huge gap between men and women. Female representation is very poor. So why should, as a Minister for Trade and Industry, or as a person in business, why should you be concerned about this? Well, the first reason, of course, is that it's about fairness. It's about justice. It's about equal opportunity. But it's also about long-term sustainable business. There is a lot of research that shows a positive correlation between a company's diversity, including the number of women in senior management, and its financial results. So that's one reason to embrace diversity. Diversity helps to provide a different and often useful perspective on various issues that are valuable to a company. Diversity also helps to solve challenges and see new opportunities, and as a result will contribute to improving the bottom line. So if you want to do something with diversity, it has to be a firm commitment from the head of the company, the leaders, the management, but also from the board. Because a lot of this has to do with company culture. Let me just emphasize the point further. Are there any reasons why a business shouldn't be interested in gender equality? Look at the world we're living in. In all countries, in the West and around the world, outside the Western world as well, you'll see that girls are doing better in school on average than boys are. We're seeing girls and women breaking in to areas of higher education that used to be male bastions. 30 years ago in Norway, the cliché would be a male doctor and a female nurse. Today, a long time ago, several years ago, the majority of the people studying medicine in Norway are women.
As a top-ranked business school, our most important responsibility is to impact knowledge development, pushing the research frontiers and sharing new knowledge with our students and the society as a whole. This week is all about fulfilling this mission. In the first row, in front of me, we have 6 students from all around the world. We have experienced gender equality the Norwegian way, part of a larger BI project called the Gender Equality Experience. Throughout this week, I know you have gained new insight and also challenged your way of thinking. I have been thoroughly briefed on your achievements, and I'm very proud of what you have done so far. So well done to you. Moving knowledge forward, breaking new ground, takes brilliant minds. The motion of knowledge is made up by thousands of small steps and the occasional leap. The value of role models.
Look for that kind of company or want to work in that kind of company. So one of the things I stress as a Minister for Trade and Industry is that it's not just about fairness, and it's not just about equal opportunity, even though those are utterly important. It's about business opportunities. I have a daughter, Carla. She's 4 years old. I have a son as well. He's 2 years old.
Former U.S. Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Secretary Clinton has been a vocal advocate for women's rights, and she has fought important battles throughout her significant career. This effort corresponds directly with BI's strategy, aiming to shape people and business for a sustainable future. BI have made strong commitment to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, gender equality, quality education, and climate action. Secretary Clinton has used her influence in a number of important areas, as she strives for a society in which women have the power to affect change for development, justice, and for peace. Hillary Rodham Clinton has spent 4 decades in public service as an advocate, attorney, First Lady, U.S. Senator, U.S. Secretary of State, and presidential candidate. As First Lady of the United States from 1993 to 2001, Hillary Clinton championed healthcare for all Americans and led successful bipartisan efforts to improve the adoption and foster care systems, reduce teen pregnancy, and create the Children's Health Insurance Program. She traveled to more than 80 countries, standing up for human rights, democracy, and civil society. In 2000, Hillary Clinton made history as the first First Lady elected to the United States Senate, and the first woman elected to statewide office in New York. As senator, she worked across party lines to expand economic opportunity and access to quality, affordable health care. In 2007, she began her historic campaign for president, winning 18 million votes and becoming the first woman to ever win a presidential primary or caucus state. In the 2008 general election, she campaigned for Barack Obama and Joe Biden. And in December, she was nominated by President-elect Obama to be Secretary of State. In 2016, Hillary Clinton made history again by becoming the first woman nominated for president by a major U.S. political party. As the Democratic candidate for president, she campaigned on a vision of America that is stronger together, and an agenda to make our economy work for everyone, not just those at the top. On behalf of BI, it is an honor and joy to welcome Secretary Clinton to our academic community and to the BI family. Please welcome Hillary Rodham Clinton on stage to accept the diploma conferring her. And now, we are eager to listen to the remarks of the former U.S. Secretary of State and BI's new honorary doctor, Hillary Rodham Clinton. The conversation will be led by Eirik Bergesen. Please welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I am greatly delighted to be here and appreciate well, thank you very much, and I am greatly delighted to be here and appreciate the honorary degree from BI, and look forward to our conversation on this International Women's Day, and especially because of the Gender Equality Conference that has been sponsored here. So let's get started.
Excellent. Thank you, and congratulations. So on behalf of the school, the students, and the faculty, we're very honored to have you here, and I'm very happy to today to convey the questions of the students, and some of my own, and composites of your questions. Okay. So and previously we had to get American politicians to come here. We had to give them Nobel Peace Prizes. So we're glad to have you here. And to talk on this substantive matter. As you said, this has been the theme of the whole week, and certainly of today, which is also Women's Day. And we've received a lot of questions from you students, and some have to do with the social and political value, obviously, of gender equality, but also a lot of them on the economic value of gender equality, which we've talked a lot about in the conference today, and most of the questions also deal with today. So yeah, let's dive into it. The first question is easy, one would think, but since it deals with gender equality and from learning from history, there are no easy questions and certainly no easy answers when it comes to this. But here goes. Isn't the economic case for gender equality so simple that any qualified business leader can understand it? you make more money from it. You get to choose from the whole talent pool, and not just half of it. And we heard earlier today about how that high representation of women in the workforce is just as important as the oil to the Norwegian economy. What would you say to that?
Well, I would agree with that. That's a great way of putting it. I think the economic case is incredibly strong, but it is still either not believed adequately enough or ignored. And it is a case that is built now on decades of research about what grows an economy and what are the steps that a government or a business can take to increase GDP or increase profitability. Very simply, the evidence is overwhelming that a higher labor force participation rate by women increases economic output, increases the gross domestic product, that having women in the economy, particularly at all levels of the economy, especially in decision-making roles, leads to better decision-making that is in turn more effective and catalyzing for further economic growth. And a lot of governments in the last decade have recognized this. The most obvious, maybe well-known example is the current government of Japan, led by Prime Minister Abe, who, when he came into office, actually reached out to me and we talked about some of his ideas for stimulating what had been a sluggish Japanese economy for quite some time. And in particular, trying to devise ways to enable more women to get into the Japanese workforce. And he understood, based again on international as well as national economic analysis, that that was one of the best ways Japan could proceed. And so he has been trying to encourage businesses, encourage greater social supports for women, so especially when they have children, they can manage both their family and their work responsibilities. That's just one example, but you could literally go across the globe and you could point out every economy that would increase if women's labor participation were not just encouraged, but expedited, enabled by governments. And the fact that Norway has over 72% women labor participation is one of your great economic assets. In my own country, in the United States, women's labor participation has dropped. It's dropped now to, depending upon the survey, slightly over 60%. That 12% gap between Norway and the United States is significant. It's significant for women's autonomy, for women's own income and economic prospects, and it is very important to the overall economic outlook. So the evidence is there, and the real question is, why is it so hard? Why is it so difficult for businesses and governments to recognize that they try all kinds of economic development tactics and overlook perhaps the most effective one right in their midst? And maybe we can talk more about that, because if you go around the globe and you can see what increasing women's labor force participation would mean to the overall economy, obviously in some parts of the world, like the Middle East, Africa, getting women out of the informal economy where they are working, but where their work is not being recognized and not being considered as part of the national economy, to even the so-called developed nations.
And how do you explain the fact you just stated that a lot of people probably think that, oh, it's at least going in the right direction. It's probably not going fast enough for many people, but that there's actually a decline, and in America, and people maybe are leaning back and thinking that, well, history will take care of itself, but it doesn't seem to.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, there was a steady forward movement until relatively recently in the United States. In other countries, there has been forward movement, but then also backward. So it's a constant back and forth as opposed to a steady state. Speaking for the United States, part of our challenge is how difficult and expensive it is for individual families and certainly individual women to find childcare that they can afford, that is quality, reliable childcare. The absence of paid leave in most cases, although there's a move to try to deal with that, not yet accomplished. The implicit and explicit bias that still exists in lots of sectors of the economy against women. And I think that in other countries, there may be deeper bias, more resistance. I've been following what Japan has done, and Prime Minister Abe has really encountered lots of resistance. The way the whole society functions, the typical working family, particularly upper middle class in Japan, the husband works very long hours, including late into the night, because socializing after work hours is considered, part of the job, how you get attention that can then perhaps lead to salary increases and promotions. So women are primarily the caregivers during most of the week, and the kind of services that are available require great maternal involvement. So these traditions, these cultural views about what is or isn't appropriate for women are proving difficult, even for somebody in a government like Prime Minister Abe, who knows that if he can just get more women in the labor force, the Japanese economy would improve.
Thank you. And there are challenges left in Norwegian society as well. We've talked a lot about that already today. But I'd like to talk a little bit about so it's International Women's Day today, but gender equality in the workplace is not only a women's issue, it's a family issue. And given that women do 3 times as much of taking care of the kids and twice as much housework, their equality at home is important as well. And how do we get men, how do we get the male students here when they start families to help advance the careers of the women in their lives, and wives and spouses?
Well, I think you suggested the answer in the beginning, because the idea of gender equality, women's economic opportunities, is ultimately a family economic challenge. And it is clear that, again, going back to the United States, women are not yet paid equally. And yet, when they go to buy groceries at the store, they don't get to the cash register and have the attendant say, well, okay, you're a working woman, so you only have to pay 78 or 82% of what the cost is. Well, of course, that's ridiculous. But the fact is that the family economic unit would be strengthened by women's participation and by enabling women to be fully involved in their workplace and have all of the same opportunities that men would have for advancement and promotion. It's difficult because of the challenges of balancing family and work. And I think a lot of couples make what is a realistic assessment early in their marriage life or their parenting life, where they say, look, it's too expensive for us both to be working, because then we have to pay more for childcare, or we're not attentive enough to the children. So there's a either explicit or implicit agreement that, the husband's or the man's, the partner's career will take precedence. And that seems like a sensible decision early on, but as the years go by, it becomes quite penalizing, because then women are not making the incomes that they could have made that will, in later years, support the family unit, support the retirement years that couples might have, or if a woman is divorced or widowed and doesn't have and is not part of a couple, that she will have adequate resources as she gets older. So a lot of those decisions really depend on what are the external supports in terms of childcare, leave, and the like, and what are the internal discussions and decisions that couples make. Because if there can be a way to work out early on that both people will be supported in advancing his and her career, economically that will benefit the family throughout the course of their lives together. But it's a tough call. I mean, it really is. It's hard when you've got, you know, newborn baby, you've got toddlers, you've got school-age children, and they need you and they need your attention. It's just, you know, a very difficult decision to try to work out all the balance. And I think it is certainly fair to say that, again, going back to the United States, but by no means only the United States, you know, men are and women are viewed differently in the workplace. And, you know, it still is quite unusual for men in the United States to ask for paternal leave of more than, you know, maybe 72 hours, a couple of days to get acquainted with the newborn. It's just something that people feel, men particularly feel, will penalize them. When I was a young lawyer many years ago, I remember reading an advice column. Okay, so I read advice columns all the time. And this one was a letter that was printed to a man who gave advice about the workplace. And the letter question was, I've just gotten a promotion, so I, for the first time, will have my own office space. And I don't know how to decorate it. I don't know what I should put in it. It seems like a kind of silly little question, but, you know, this person knew that he or she, because it was only signed by initials, would be judged, as we all are, by everything. So the answer was, I cannot tell from your initials whether you are a man or a woman. If you are a man, fill your office space with pictures of your family, because it will convey to your employers and your colleagues that you are a serious person who takes your family responsibilities to heart, and therefore will be a more predictable, reliable employee. If you are a woman, do not put pictures of your family in your office space, because then people will think you cannot keep your mind on your work. Now, this was a number of years ago, but those kinds of implicit biases are still at work. And so when we think about how does a nation or a society make a judgment to create more gender equality and all the things that need to be done to support and enable women, then you also have to ask, how do the individuals or the couples similarly make those decisions? And that's, you know, that's an ongoing discussion. Mm.
So we're focusing now on women with children or families with children, but the female workers are affected. You appear in the Netflix series Explained in an episode called Why Women Are Paid Less. Mm-hmm. And it states that the gender gap really is between women with children and everybody else. How does one target this problem?
I really recommend the Netflix series Explain. They take an individual problem and they try to break it down. And that was the one that they interviewed me for on pay equality. And it made the point that historically, when men and women enter the workforce at the same level of experience, same level of education, they are paid equally. But as they go up the employment ladder, very often disparities begin to appear. Even while they're still single, still unmarried, still without children. And there seems to be a kind of step ladder approach, where women are on a ladder with shorter steps than men. And so the men are moving up, even when there are similar evaluations of their work, similar workplace assessments. But the big gap shows up when women have children. And again, some of it is expectations that might never be expressed along the lines of, well, you know, I just thought now that you had children that you couldn't take on that additional responsibility, so I never asked. Or now that you have children, I thought that I'd be doing you a favor by not offering you more overtime or more assignments. And this whole question about implicit bias is really an important one, because so many people really do think they are being fair. They are trying to evaluate situations within the context of a workforce, and they're trying to understand, okay, who can I really get the most work out of? And I don't want to impose unfair burdens on someone who has other responsibilities. But that assessment only goes one way, only goes toward young mothers. It does not go toward young fathers. And so because of that, those disparities begin to show up, and then they continue. You know, finally, the tech companies are looking at their payrolls, and some interesting things are being discovered. The first who did that was Salesforce. Mark Benioff, the founder and president, CEO of Salesforce, was, you know, he wanted to challenge himself as to whether or not, with all this talk of pay inequality, his company was guilty of that. So he had his HR department, his payroll people, run, you know, analyses, and they found out, yes, indeed, that's exactly what happened. Enter at the same, first step, maybe 2-3 steps, staying the same, and then even before marriage, before children, beginning to see the disparities, and then having those grow. So he ordered that, you know, the disparities be eliminated, and that people at the same level, with the same experience, the same kind of evaluations, be given the same pay. And I haven't had a chance to read the study, but I saw the recent news about Google finding out that they were underpaying some men. So, you know, we are living at a time when transparency is really the name of the game. You need to know. If you work for a government, usually pay levels are public information. And so if you're at a certain grade of employment, a certain level of responsibility, you know what the salaries are, and a lot of people choose government work, and at least they did in the past, in part because they felt like there would be common economic rewards. In the private sector, not so much. We don't have that kind of information for the vast majority of companies anywhere in the world. But I do think it would be a great service to the companies as well as to their employees if they began to do the same kind of analysis that Salesforce did.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about staying at home with kids, and even staying at home after the maternity leave is over, it's also obviously a legitimate choice to stay at home, and one has to talk about this still, like without diminishing the value of care. But how does one make it easier for women to re-enter the workforce after paternity leave and not feel like it's a maternity penalty?
Well, I think that, first of all, your point is really important. You know, the caregiving that we do during our lives, whether it be for children or for a sick, ailing, ill spouse, or for parents or other older relatives, you know, is a lot of what makes life special and makes life worth living. So you don't want to have such a transactional view of human development and of opportunities in one's life that you diminish or penalize the value of caregiving. But if at the same time you're looking at the economy, how do you try to manage both? And how do you give credit to the caregivers? You know, one of the big problems we've got in our, what we call Social Security, the retirement income after the age of 65, is that if you have been a full-time mother, or if you were in the workforce and you dropped out because you had a sick child or a sick spouse or a sick parent and you've been caring for that, the value of your care is significant. Hundreds of thousands of dollars that you would have to either pay for or the government would have to help pay for in the marketplace. You get no credit for that. So if you do get back into the workforce, you usually get back in at a level that it is far below where you would have been had you not dropped out of the workforce in the first place. And so you get no credit and you get penalized at the same time. There has to be a better way to think about this and to enact social programs that not only give paid leave to caregiving parents and caregivers of other loved ones, family members and the like, but that gives some financial credit in terms of re-entry into the workforce or in terms of credit toward pensions and Social Security and the like. This, I think, will become an increasingly important public issue because it's so unfair the way it is currently set up. And one of the other problems is that suppose you started off in your 20s working in your field, whatever it was, in business, in the professions, and you did, you went on maternity leave and you didn't go back for a couple of years. Maybe you had another child at that time, so you were really focused on getting your children off to a good start. And then you thought your children are in school, you know, they're doing fine, you want to get back into the workforce. Unless you're very lucky, you will get no credit, no respect for the time that you spent doing what arguably is the most important work anyone can do, preparing the next generation. So you go back into the workforce and you will be behind the colleagues you started with. Understandably, they didn't leave, you did. But there has to be some better approach than sidelining that talent. And a lot of women who I've known who found themselves in that position, you know, started their own businesses. They became entrepreneurial. They didn't go back into an established company where they would be slotted below where they thought they deserved to be. And that's one of the good news stories about this, because in the United States, women-owned businesses are the fastest growing number of businesses. Now, a lot of them don't necessarily succeed right away. That's hard work. But women are being confident enough to start their own enterprises, which is one way of trying to get back into the workforce without the penalty. You know, it requires an enormous amount of confidence and hard work, but you're your own boss and you're not being, you know, discredited in your own eyes for the time that you took off.
Mm. I'd like to talk a little bit about the legislative measures and ask you, Secretary Clinton, about how you look upon that area. And this is one of the differences, obviously, between the Nordic countries and America. And I'd like to just mention a few examples. We've talked earlier today about quotas, and we've heard from scientists here at the school about how it's a good idea, but it needs to be a part of a whole. But it is a way of speeding up progress, and because we have a gender balance law that says that 40% that demands 40% females in company boards. And we also have paternity leave, which is more or less a use it or lose it paternity leave. It's being discussed in Parliament these days. Still very controversial in many areas in Norwegian politics. And Iceland I also like to mention, because it was the first country to pass a law last year that ensures equal pay for equal work, regardless of gender. what do you think about these legislative measures?
Well, I think, you know, and I really admire the Nordic countries' history of trying to really establish benchmarks for gender equality and pass laws that encourage people and require people to take actions to move toward gender equality. Look, I think equal pay should be the most obvious requirement, and we have a requirement for equal pay in the United States, but oftentimes it doesn't apply, or it is not understood by employees, and they don't demand it, or they don't actually even sue to guarantee their rights. We have a famous case named for a woman named Lily Ledbetter, who was the first supervisor that they call a foreman on the floor of a big factory in Alabama, and I think there were 6 or 7 male counterparts, and she did not know for years that she was paid less for doing exactly the same job as her male counterparts. And it was, again, one of these old-fashioned assessments. Well, you know, she had a husband at home and he was bringing in money, so, you know, that she didn't need to make as much as men who were supporting their families. But as she rightly pointed out, when she finally found out about it, she sued about it, but complicated case. She was too late, and she didn't get her own lawsuit's benefit, although then the law was changed, and actually President Obama signed the law into action. I mention that because you can have equal pay on the books, but if people don't have transparency, they don't know whether they're being paid equally. She didn't know that every other male, you know, foreman was being paid more than she. So you need transparency to go along with equal pay laws. Then you've got the problem of different job categories, and a lot of discussion is going on around what we call paycheck fairness. So if you are in a police department, or you are in a security department of a corporation, is the job sitting at the desk watching the cameras equivalent to the job of walking around the perimeter carrying a gun? You know, those are hard questions. You know, they're security officers. They were both hired in at the same time. The woman sits at the desk watching the cameras to be able to alert the guy with the gun on the perimeter, but the guy with the gun, you know, is walking around. And it's those questions. So once you get beyond same job at the same time in the same place, then you get into a murkier area that people are trying to sort out now. The question of quotas has never been really addressed in our country. I think the Nordic countries, and I believe now Germany and a few other European countries, have either required or strongly suggested increasing the number of women on corporate boards. And you know, I think that something like that, whether it's an incentive or a disincentive, makes sense, because one of the most common refrains we still hear in the United States when people are asked, why don't you have any women on your board, is, well, I just can't find any. Well, that is just ridiculous. There are so many qualified women, and in fact there are whole search firms with lists of qualified women. So people are not looking very hard. And if you don't send that signal from the top, you don't really begin the cultural change down through the organization. And you know, I doubt that you know, we will have such legislation passed in our own country, but individual companies should be under pressure and should be you know, held to account if they have no women on their board. So I think there are steps that can be taken, and at this point, partly because of the Nordic countries' example, there should be enough data that people can say, okay, did it make a difference? I mean, did Did the quality of employment? Did the goods and services provided? Did the bottom line? Whatever the criteria might be to determine, did this make a difference that we had women on the board? The evidence I know suggests that it does, that diverse groups make better decisions. So it's not just diversity of gender, it's just diversity across all categories, so that you have people in decision-making roles who can contribute to the discussion. And there was a recent study, and again, I don't know anything other than what they reported, but that companies with women CEOs, at least recently, were doing better, that they were actually more profitable. And so we need to look at the data, and we need then to apply the lessons from it, and we need to think of ways to incentivize more and more companies to be willing to take that on board and make some changes.
Thank you, and that's obviously something that we have a lot of room for development here in Norway as well. We discussed it earlier today, and because there's such a difference between the public sector and the private sector, and while we have even the center-right government that we have these days, we have 4 party leaders are women, Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Finance Minister are women. And so 41% of politicians in Norway are women. However, only 13% of business leaders are women. This is a business school. So there's some work to do here, guys and girls. Why is that even in the Nordic countries? There's such a difference between those two sectors in society.
Well, I didn't know the statistics until you just mentioned them. Does not surprise me. I think the public is ahead of the private sector. And it's taken a long time to get there, but you're on your second woman prime minister. And the Norwegian government, as you said, has a number of women in high major posts. I met with your foreign minister earlier today, and I'm very grateful to the Norwegian government. They support the climate work of the Clinton Foundation and have for a number of years. So there is an awareness, I think, on the part of the public that has been building over years, that if given women candidates and you evaluate them, you feel like you're free to make the decision that would put them into power at that 40% number. But I think a lot of private sector enterprises are still having very closed conversations where people of similar backgrounds and experiences, predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly male, socialize with one another, work with one another, talk and listen to each other. And it's a kind of closed loop. And it's not just a question of opening up that loop and getting different points of view that will matter to business. I think that, I don't mean to be dramatic about this, but I think that there are lots of young people raising questions about capitalism. You know, is this the method we want? Do we want, free markets? Well, we do, maybe, if they're appropriately reflective of the public good, of common effort, of positive results. Well, how do we put all that together? And I think that it's not just the right thing to do. I think it's essential for businesses to pay more attention to these social questions, because there is in many places right now a bit of a backlash, isn't there? And there's unfortunately building concern about whether we can produce the kinds of economic growth, the inclusive prosperity that we are looking for in countries like Norway and certainly the United States, if the model is not more open and that people are not more willing to, not just look at the bottom line with the quarterly results, but are willing to start saying there's more than one stakeholder. It's not only shareholders, it's employees, it's customers, it's communities, something that was much more common 50 years ago before there was a concerted effort on the part of economists and theoreticians and business leaders to really narrow the focus. So this is not just about gender equality. We see some of the same challenges on democracy. You know, if you don't have a government that looks like your society, that, you know, you cannot be what you cannot see, then you begin to maybe distrust it or maybe reject it because you don't see your voice, your personhood represented. So I think there are crises affecting both government and business and the market that can be dealt with in part by being more transparent, by being more open, by being more representative, and, you know, including women, opening up those circles of opportunity is part of the way to answer that.
I'd like to turn to rhetoric. We live in a social media driven age with public debate driven often by sound bites, and politicians such as yourself, Secretary Clinton, are often judged as not being snappy enough. Your message doesn't fit well on hats. But 25 years ago, at the 4th annual UN World Conference on Women in Beijing, you used a phrase that still sticks today. To you and to the women's movement. You said that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. Now, 25 years later, what is the status of this?
Well, you are certainly right about snappy slogans that fit on hats. And, you know, appeal to nostalgia and all other kinds of things. We won't go into that. So I think...
We might get into that later.
Yeah, well, I think what I said in 1995 struck a chord because it cut through a lot of the debate about, quote, women's issues. We were being sidelined, categorized, kind of put in a box. Like, you know, there were human rights sort of over here, and then there were women's rights somewhere over there. And it was one of the many ways that women's rights were marginalized and women's lives were ignored. Before I gave that speech in '95, I had gone to South Asia and gone to India and Pakistan and Nepal and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and visited a lot of programs for women, microcredit programs and the like. And I was so struck by the resilience and the strength of these market women, these farmer women, women who were often struggling against extraordinary odds that had been culturally and religiously imposed upon them, and how their lives were not recognized as being human rights struggles. And so when I was invited to go to Beijing, and it was quite controversial at the time, even in my own country, I wanted to try to explain the lives of women in as brief and impactful a way. And I had met a young woman in India, a high school student, who gave me a poem about silence and about how women, and she talked about her grandmother in particular, led silent lives. Their voices were not heard, their stories were not told, their lives were not respected. And so at the conference that did hit a chord, and it became a kind of rallying cry. But what also happened at the conference, which doesn't get enough attention, is that the vast majority of countries represented there signed on to a platform for action in which they talked about issues that were holding women back. Women couldn't inherit property. Women couldn't vote. Women couldn't drive cars. Women couldn't go to secondary education. Women were subjected to horrific domestic violence. You know, the list went on and on. And so over the last 25 plus years, part of the agenda for the international women's movement is to remove those obstacles, to liberate women to be able to participate fully in society. I remember getting back from that conference, and I did an interview, an international interview about it, and people were calling in from all over the world. And one of the callers was a man from Iran. And he asked me, he said, well, what do you mean by women's rights? What do women want? What rights do they want? And I said, well, I want you to shut your eyes and think about all the rights you have, because that's what women want, the same that you have. And so we've made progress. I would be the first to say that. But, you know, there are still something like 200 million girls who are not in school right now. There are more than 100 million who are subjected to female genital mutilation. There are many millions who don't get beyond primary education. Their role in the formal economy is still limited. I one time was in Africa with a group of experts, so to speak, and everywhere I looked, I saw women. I saw women working in the fields. I saw women in the marketplace. I saw women carrying firewood. I saw women carrying babies. And, you know, I said to one of the economists with us, you know, these women are working from sun up to sundown and beyond, and yet they don't earn very much money, if any at all, and their work is not considered important. And he said, well, we don't know how to measure the informal economy. So even the work that women did, and women are the majority of smallholder farmers in the world. You go on, and you see how, if there is, for example, agricultural programs in sub-Saharan Africa, the better seeds, the better anti-erosion programs, the better advice about how to get your products to market, go to the male farmers, even though the vast majority of people tilling the soil are women. So we've made progress, but we have not by any means overcome the difficulty that so many women around the world still face in, you know, in not only taking care of themselves, but being primarily responsible for taking care of their families, often extended families. So I think that the level of effort has to be seen as necessary at all levels. So, you know, getting those women the right to inheritance under their laws, getting those women access to those seeds for drought condition is just as important as getting more women into the C-suite. You have to work from both ends at the same time.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the women's movement in America in particular as well, because Secretary Clinton, in the midterm elections, things changed in America. You now have went from 20 to 23% women representation in Congress. And actually, not much reported upon. The Congress got 10 years younger, so a lot of and had been steady declining or becoming older for a while. You talked a little bit about how history tends to do that, 2 steps ahead and maybe 1 back. But now we went maybe at least 2 steps ahead in America. And how is that? How is that changing American politics? And do you think also it's a bit of a stress test? It's a type of a checks and balance to the political development from the administration?
Well, I think we elected some terrific, as you say, young, vibrant, dynamic members of Congress. And it was, in many instances, a reaction to what had happened in 2016. The numbers of voters in what we call a midterm election surged, the highest that it's been in, 70, 80, maybe longer years. So there was both a positive energy that really was generated by the candidates themselves, that they were exciting, they were diverse, they worked really hard, and they won over voters, and the energy, the negative energy of making a statement against the administration and the Republican Congress. So we really did make progress, but it's a challenging political environment, to say the least. And there's a lot going on that I think will, in the end, prove to be beneficial toward both more women and more young people in politics, but also to reversing course away from a lot of the negative decisions that are being made by this administration on the environment, on every issue you can imagine where the clock is being turned back. But it's by no means a sure thing. It is, you mentioned social media earlier, it is increasingly difficult to convey a fact-based position, to rely on evidence in an environment where there are so many voices, and some of them, as we now know, manipulated voices, bots and the like that are being controlled from outside our own country. So how do we sort through that? I mean, if we're going to have a debate, which we definitely must have, it's something I've been working on, as the introduction said, since 1993, about how we get quality, affordable, universal health care for everybody. How are we going to have a debate if you cannot get to any common understanding of the facts, the consequences of various actions that might be taken? And the vitriol that exists online from different political positions is a force to be reckoned with. And it's very hard to keep up with it. It's hard to counter it. It's hard to overwhelm it. And especially if you have what we believe is a foreign adversary doing a lot of the promoting of messaging with a huge apparatus at their disposal. This is a problem for every democracy, every political system. You can vote against me or anybody in politics for any reason you want. But if you vote against someone because you are fundamentally misled, you are fed a steady stream of untruths, then you're being suckered because you're not making a rational decision. You are being manipulated. And propaganda has gotten much more sophisticated. And so I think we've got new, young voices who are already under attack. Some of these new members of Congress are already being viciously attacked. And finally, we are calling out the Fox News network for what it is, state propaganda, with a very, very clear set of goals to disrupt the political system in favor of those who will do their bidding. So, at least we're talking about some of the factors, but we're not yet at a position where we can overcome them yet. And I think that's going to be a continuing problem for any democracy in any election. How are voters ever going to sort out all of the barrage of information they are receiving in order to make even the best choice for their own interests?
You mentioned how the young and often female new Congress people are attacked, and they also have a different way of going on the offense. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was criticized for dancing, so she kept on dancing. Is that a new way of hitting back at these forces that you mentioned?
Well, I think that if you're not active on social media in today's political environment, you're missing one of the most important channels to your constituents, to voters, to the general public. So I don't think there's a choice. Some people obviously are more able to use it for their benefit than others, but there's no choice. You have to be engaged in that conversation. But if you are one voice against 1,000 bots, as good as you might be, it may not be enough. I mean, I had people who campaigned for me in 2016 who would go door to door, knocking on doors with campaign literature, asking people to vote for me. People who were my strong supporters, some of whom had been my friends for decades. And someone would come to the door and they'd say, well, I can't vote for her, she kills people. Oh, really? Who did she kill? Well, I saw it on the internet. Well, why would you believe it? Because it was on the internet. Where on the internet? Well, I saw it on Facebook. Oh, okay. I can't vote for her, she's dying. Where did you see that? I saw it on the internet. I saw it on Facebook. Facebook is the biggest news conveyor in the world. And they have done great damage. Forget political candidates. They've done great damage. We are now facing, measles outbreaks in places in the United States and Europe because you have all of these anti-vaccination voices on Facebook who know nothing, who have no responsibility for protecting children and communities, but they've had a big impact. And we've got a big measles outbreak right now in Oregon because all of these mothers who thought they were doing the right thing but were looking in the wrong place for information refused to vaccinate their children. So this is not just about politics, but we see it often most acutely in a political setting.
The way you... the way you were attacked, and I think it's important to be concrete here. On the stage in the presidential debate, now President Donald Trump called you a nasty woman. And while the former First Lady Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high. Looking back, and I know you reflect upon this in your book, could you have tackled that question, that approach in a different way? If you had stopped in your tracks, you were trying to come across with a policy point, and turned to him and said, could you repeat that? Is that something you would appreciate somebody said to your wife, to your daughter? Is this the greatest democracy on earth? What would have happened if you had done that?
Well, as you rightly point out, in my book, What Happened, I have a chapter about being a woman in politics. And I don't take that example. I take the example of him stalking me on the stage in the second debate. And it's quite unnerving to have someone leering over you, being kind of constantly in your space. And my mind was whirling around trying to figure out, what do I do? If I confront him about it, what are the chances people will, instead of seeing me standing up for myself, think that I can't handle it? Okay? Or maybe think, if I turn around and say, what are you doing? What is this about? That no matter how measured I try to be, it will come across as defensive and angry. I mean, all of this, and I'm trying to keep my attention on what I'm supposed to be doing. They said I won the debate, but look, I think that he sent a lot of messages, sort of alpha male messages, to his supporters, and it was very difficult in the moment. Now, because I've talked about this and written about it, and we have women running for president, if one of them ends up as the nominee and finds herself in a similar situation, it will not be unusual for her to respond because my story has given, permission for that to happen. But it is still difficult. There's a quite large percentage of the Republican Party that say they would never vote for a woman for president. And there are still doubts even in the Democratic Party, not about any individual woman, so much as just can I envision a woman as the President of the United States? And so trying to create the level of confidence in your abilities, in your potential to be Commander-in-Chief, is a really hard line to walk for a woman. Because, you know, even though it's quite amusing to me, we see all these men blowing up all the time in public, and yet, you know, is she too emotional? Is she this? Is she that? So it is, in our political system, I've always said that it's easier for a woman to become a prime minister than a president. If you are in politics in Norway or the UK or Germany, you get elected in your constituency where people can know you personally, where they're not going to be misled by all the rumors and the nonsense stories that are put out. I mean, they saw you at the grocery store, they saw you on the street. And then your colleagues can get to know you and can appreciate your skills and your leadership. So you can actually be chosen by your colleagues as the head of your party, and then you're chosen as prime minister. In a presidential system, and particularly in our system, it is like running the gauntlet. You have to raise, in my case, or anybody who gets a nomination, you have to raise more than $1 billion. You have to put together a huge startup organization from a dead stop and get it up and running so that it can, you know, carry you across the finish line. And you have to contend with all of these caricatures and stereotypes and expectations if you're a woman running that, you know, men don't, because there can be a, you know, you can look at a stage full of men, they're different heights, they're different behaviors, they have, you know, different attitudes, but that all fits into a large definition of a potential leader. Now I'm hoping with more women running, it can possibly expand the definition for women. But it is still very difficult to figure out the right approach to coming across to, you know, 330 million people as someone who can handle the job, who is a pair of trusted hands without making a misstep from, you know, time to time.
Mm. And could I ask you, Secretary Clinton, you also you talked about how foreign powers try to influence elections and disinformation, propaganda, and so on. A lot of people are waiting for a report these days, the Mueller report, which most probably will outline what has happened, and it's a start of the process will continue. We know it won't answer all the questions, but I'd like to just take you back to when you were a young lawyer helping investigate Watergate and preparing an impeachment charges against President Nixon, and we know that he welcomed the report saying that, or welcomed the investigation saying that the American people have a right to know if their president is a crook or not. But we also know that privately that was not his opinion at all. He was very upset about it. And the current president is not only privately but publicly very upset about this. He's tweeted every other day, according to New York Times, he's tweeted about this. But in July 1974, after a long battle, the Supreme Court, through your work and others, ordered Nixon to surrender the secretly recorded White House conversations that highlighted this. What can we expect, and what do you expect? What do you hope for when the Mueller report comes?
Well, I think there's already a lot of information in the public domain for people who are interested in following this. There have been 2 major indictments by Mueller of Russian individuals and organizations. The first indictment dealt with the interference on social media, and it is quite a read if you can follow American legalese to see the evidence that recites intercepted phone conversations, intercepted email messages about from Russian generals to their subordinates about what they're supposed to be doing on social media. There's a memorable line which goes something like, say anything negative about Hillary Clinton, but not Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. We support them. And that's a direct quote. So if you read that, you can see the very intense effort that the Russians were engaged in to influence public opinion, to sow discord and divisiveness on social media. The second indictment goes to the hacking, the theft of materials. Remember, Richard Nixon was brought down largely because of a physical burglary. He had agents breaking into the Democratic National Committee to steal information. This is the equivalent of that, only through cyber means. So the Russians stole DNC information, stole information from my campaign manager, and then they weaponized that information. And they were aided and abetted in some way that perhaps we will learn more about when Mueller issues a final report or more indictments. There's a very well-known, respected academic by the name of Kathleen Hall Jamieson, and for years her specialty has been studying elections. And she had retired, and people came and said, you know, you've got to look at this. You've got all this data and this backlog of information and experience. So she did. And her conclusion, after looking at everything that's already in the public domain, was that the social media attack by the Russians certainly influenced opinions. The theft of the information and the release of it and the weaponization of it affected the outcome. So that's one expert who's looking hard and analyzing what's already out there. So we don't know whether what Mueller has will rise to the level that is necessary for a criminal indictment. But there's a lot of dots to be connected. Let me just say one other thing about that, which is I did serve on the what was the House Judiciary Committee impeachment inquiry staff in 1974. And our job was to gather evidence. And we were meticulous about this. We were led by lawyers who were as nonpartisan and independent as you could be. They were Republicans and Democrats, but that was irrelevant. They were accomplished lawyers of integrity. And they were adamant that, you know, no opinion would come into our analysis. It would all be and only be facts. And because of that work, when the evidence was presented to the Judiciary Committee, the vote to impeach President Nixon in that committee was bipartisan. 3 Republicans joined all of the Democrats. And I don't know whether that would happen today. You know, I don't know whether we've gotten so far away from the rule of law and evidence leading to whatever conclusions one should reach that we could expect any kind of bipartisan cooperation. But that did happen in '74, and because that happened, that led to President Nixon resigning, because he could see that it was stacked against him. The evidence was stacked against him.
And I have a question that deals with what you would have done differently, Secretary Clinton. And we were talking about it earlier as well with that incident on stage. Forgive me, but it's difficult to ask that question without saying, what would you have done differently if you had run again? Okay? So this is the disguised "are you running" question. Did you pick up on that? Because you were quoted, and this is only Tuesday. It was a fairly small TV station, upstate New York. And you were quoted saying, this was the most definitive until now, saying that you would keep on working and speaking and standing up for what you believe, but you were not running. Was that a bit too definitive as of now? Do you see a situation where you We talked about the Mueller report, where you actually find yourself running.
You know, no matter what I say, I'm going to be in trouble. I cannot imagine running. I just can't. And I've said it repeatedly and over again. Look, I am in the camp of people who believe it's imperative that our country elect a different president. I think that for the sake not only of the United States, but of the entire world, and so you all have a stake in this, and I have no illusions about how hard that's going to be. The people who support him are still very committed to their position, and mustering the resources, the organization, fighting against all of the propaganda, the active measures that are going to be used against a Democratic nominee is not for the faint-hearted. It is incredibly hard. And, you know, when I look back at the campaign we ran, I mean, I had, you know, the best political operatives you could find, people who had been involved in President Obama's campaigns, either 08 and 12 or both, people who had great track records of winning in difficult races in tough states. We really compiled a tremendous talent roster for our campaign. We obviously raised the money that was needed, but we were running, as somebody recently wrote, we were running like Obama 2.0, and we did it very well. But Trump was running an entirely different kind of campaign, and he did it very well. And it was a campaign that a lot of it was very much out front, in public, the insults, the crowds that just absolutely ate up every word he said, and the more insulting it was, the more they responded with great cheers and chants and all the rest of it. But then there was the sort of under-the-radar campaign. You know, there was a recent academic study which looked at people who had voted for Obama in 2012 and then voted for Trump in 2016. It was done by Ohio State University. And they asked this cohort of voters who they identified, well, what changed your mind? And predominantly, it were these lies about me. So I was dying was one of the big ones. I was somehow responsible for weapons for ISIS, go figure, and that Pope Francis had endorsed Trump. And when these people were at, where did you see this? Same answer, on the internet. But not just, you know, a friend sharing this information, but really well-produced, phony news broadcasts. You know, from a studio in Macedonia or Ukraine, primarily. There would be a very American-looking and talking guy, maybe an American, in a studio, and, oh, you know, Pope Francis endorsed Donald Trump today. And then there would be messages sent to targeted people's social media feeds. And we had no idea all this was happening. I mean, you know, occasionally it would break through into the mainstream press, and it was ludicrous on the face. Pope Francis didn't endorse Trump. They got into a Twitter war when Pope Francis went to our border, and Trump insulted the Pope. And the Pope defended refugees, as a Pope should, right? And yet, it didn't matter because people were getting the information that they valued and trusted the most. So I believe that in the next election, whatever they were able to do in 2016, they will do even better and more of now. And if you're running, as all of our candidates are, and we have, as you know, many running, they're not able to build the infrastructure that the Russians already have, or that the Trump campaign has been adding to ever since the 2016 election, or that Fox News is propagating the stories. So it will be a challenge. Now, there's no doubt the majority of voters and public opinion and energy is on our side. But I'm going to do everything I can to make sure the Democrat wins, whoever the Democrat is.
I think we only have time for one last question. You mentioned that there is a vast field of Democratic candidates. 5 of them are women, and it's only getting started. So last question, if we put it, and you also have throughout your remarks, and thank you so much, analyzed American society, and also pointed to a lot of challenges that remain, and your thoughts upon them. So let me put it this way: if you were to run, who would be a good pick for vice president?
You are very persistent. Look, I'm not going to comment on the field. I know everybody who's running, they all have strengths and weaknesses, like every person and every political candidate. And as you also point out, the field is not yet set. There are likely to be a couple more significant announcements within the next month. At least I think so right now. So the field will probably not be complete until maybe by the first debate, which is in June. And then you'll see who has staying power, who can raise the money. I mean, it's really almost kind of sad that our system depends so much on raising so much money, and the campaigns are so long. But that is what we currently have. And so then we'll begin to see, like, who's going to catch fire, who's going to be able to stand on that debate stage and distinguish him or herself. So we don't know yet. But it is, it is exciting to have both so many candidates running and so many women running. And at the end of the day, the Democrats are looking for whoever's the strongest candidate to put up against Trump, and who can withstand what is a tremendously toxic, negative campaign coming from the other side, and emerge victorious. And that's all we care about right now. We got to win. That's important. Thank you. I'm sorry I had my back to you. I apologize. Thank you very much, Eirik. That was great.
Thank you so much as well, Secretary Clinton, for your remarks and talking so candidly and openly to our students and faculty members. And thank you for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you. picture? Okay. Here, well, you all come here and wait, give me your phone.
Thank you so much.
Give me your phone. We'll do it from this direction.
I stayed up all night when you were president, and I worked so hard. Sorry.
Okay. Can get all these ladies in here? Okay.
Oh, okay.
You're so welcome. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Thomas, guys, okay. So, you're handing this together already? Okay. All right, here you go. You're welcome. All right, and then I think one more right here. Okay. Down. Here you go. Hi, nice to meet you. There you go. Thank you. Okay. Hello. Yep.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Got it? Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, here we go. Right here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Thank you.
I'm actually from Macedonia.
Oh,
English
are
is
you?
Macedonia.
Yes, yeah.
So
all
I guess
of those, all of those bot farms.
Well, I've been living abroad for like 12 years. I'm 23. I guess on behalf of our country, we have to apologize.
Well, you have a wonderful country, but obviously it's
Well, not on a lot of citizens.
it's a cash industry.
Yes,
for a lot of them.
fortunately.
Yeah, I understand that. You want to do a quick selfie?
Well, if they take a picture.
Yeah, just do it. Yeah, okay.
I just wanted to say
Oh,
hi.
that's okay. That's all right. Understood. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Last one.
Okay. Are you
Yeah,
together?
I am together with her.
Okay.
Can we?
This will have to be my last one. Here we go.
Thank you.
I'll be there the whole. You want to be in it too? Yeah. Why don't you get in it too? Here, turn around. If you give me the camera. Here, give me the camera. Here, give me the camera. And we'll go it this way, direct.
You're so nice.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Ble det gruppebilde med selfie? Ja, hvordan syns dere dette var?
Utrolig bra. Veldig bra. Veldig sykt. Det var
Ja.
skikkelig snill virket det som. Ja.
Hva sa du?
Veldig hyggelig. Ja, ikke sant? Sånn ordentlig. Virkelig.
Hva tenkte dere om det hun sa på scenen i intervjuet?
Jeg er litt sånn skjelven nå, så jeg vil bare si at det var utrolig bra og inspirerende.
Veldig sånn aktuelt, mye bra å si, liksom. Det synes jeg absolutt.
Det er veldig modig å ta tak i problemene som hun har opplevd i kampanjen sin, da, at du faktisk tør å snakke om det høyt. Det er veldig bra.
Det var, ja.
Det var jo veldig ærlig. Ja, veldig ærlig.
Ja.
Men det synes jeg er bra også, for å få meg som kjent på hva hun virkelig tenker og har følt om det. Og kanskje det sinnet hun har hatt, eller hvordan hun har følt på det.
Hva tenker dere om det hun sa om Facebook?
Det første jeg tenkte var bare rett på sak. Det var utrolig bra. Altså sannhet i det hun sier da. Og det er et stort problem gjerne.
Jeg begynte å tenke litt på det, liksom, at jeg må være mer obs på ting jeg ser på. Liksom, det kan være en kilde jeg tror at jeg kan tro på, men så er det plutselig bare tull, liksom, det som blir sagt. Så man må være sånn kildekritiske.
Ja, Clinton nevnte jo en del eksempler på falske nyheter som var blitt spredd om henne under den amerikanske presidentvalgkampen. Og det er jo også gjort analyser som viser at mange av de mest spredde nyhetene før det amerikanske valget var jo nettopp slike falske nyheter. Hvor oppmerksom er dere på det når dere bruker Facebook?
Jeg vil ikke si at jeg er faktisk ikke så flink på det, eller jeg har begynt å merke det nå i hvert fall, at jeg kan lese ting og bare tro på det, liksom, og prate litt med folk om det og så videre, og så er det jo faktisk ikke noe som er sant i det hele tatt. Så ja, som sagt så skal jeg bli mer obs på det, liksom.
Ja. Jeg føler dagens ungdom må bli mer kritisk, generelt, egentlig.
Kan jeg fort få navnene deres?
Ja, Silje Svåsand Mangerøy.
Noe sånn spesiell stavemåte av etternavnet?
Svåsand Mangerøy. Ja, hvis du fikk det med. Med Å.
Ja, Jasmina Sediki. Med Y, og så 2 D-er. Ja. S-E-D-D-I-K-I, Sediki.
Hvor går veien videre på denne kvinnedagen? Skal du gå i tog?
Da har jeg ikke tenkt på. Nå skal vi egentlig bare kose oss litt i byen før vi reiser hjem. Men gratulerer med kvinnedagen.
Takk skal du ha.
Ja, takk.
Da har altså tidligere utenriksminister Hillary Clinton avsluttet sin opptreden her på Handelshøyskolen BS likestillingskonferanse i Nydalen i Oslo. Clinton stilte i samtale med programleder Eirik Bergesen i faktisk 1,5 time, gått over det som var annonsert på forhånd, og snakket både om likestilling generelt, det ubetalte arbeidet som mange kvinner gjør, og betydningen for det i arbeidslivet generelt, og gikk etter hvert også over til å være konkret og personlig om hva som skjedde under presidentvalgkampen i 2016, hva hun tenker om Mueller-etterforskningen av Røsslands påvirkning på valget, og var også personlig i sin omtale av hvordan det er å være kvinne i politikken, og spesielt da i møte med Trump i presidentvalgkampen. Det var svært spent stemning her i auditoriet da hun ankom. Det var stappfullt med studenter som alle sammen tok opp mobilkameraene da Hillary Clinton ankom rommet og satt musestille under hele hennes opptreden. Nå skal, som Clinton også sa under foredraget, har hun tidligere i dag møtt utenriksminister Ine Marie Eriksen Søreide til te. Senere i dag skal hun spise skrei hos Arbeiderpartiets leder Jonas Gahr Støre. De ble kjent da de begge var utenriksministre og har holdt kontakten siden. Der er det en kvinnedagsmiddag hvor Arbeiderpartiets nestleder Hadia Tajik, avtroppende leder for kvinnenettverket Anniken Huitfeldt og Camilla Stoltenberg, direktør for Folkehelseinstituttet, skal være til stede. Det var vår direktesending her fra BEs likestillingskonferanse. Hillary Clinton har altså ikke forlatt landet, men vi avslutter her på Dagbladet TV.